Hello and welcome back to the J&Z podcast. And today, only 1 week late, do we have a very special episode about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. Now, if you didn't know it was a Part 1 going into the movie, like a family member of mine, you might be a little bit confused about this movie, but I, for one, think it's great.
I agree. I was one of the people that didn't realize it was part one. I completely forgot about it. Even though we even talked about it on the podcast way back when they first announced this movie. I completely forgot it was a part one, so the ending did take me by surprise.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I actually went out, I was like, I really have to go to the bathroom. I was holding it through the whole movie, and I still thought there was like an hour left, so I got up, and then it was probably had 10 minutes left of the movie when I went. It was just so stupid, but besides all that, I really do enjoy the movie.
I do too. I definitely do too. I think it's one of the better movies of this year. I think it's definitely going to make my top 10.
Yes, and I think that it's going to be kind of like an Avengers Endgame to Infinity War kind of deal, except for, I personally like Infinity War more, but, one of the movies is going to be a bit weaker than the other one, but you can't have the one movie without the other. This one does feel like the middle of a trilogy, but as far as middle of a trilogy goes, besides the ending, I think it handled itself really well.
I agree and I disagree. I think this movie is definitely a 9 out of 10. I'll say that straight to the point. It's a 9 out of 10 for me. I can't say it's a 10 out of 10 like the first film because I don't know how it ends. This movie is a part one of a double movie. So when you watch part one, you're inevitably going to watch part two right after it once they're both on DVD. The bad thing about this movie is it's so good, but I don't know how they're going to land the ending. Is this going to be an Avengers Endgame where they stick the landing? It's this grand, battle, but it leads up to it, or is it going to be a Deadly Hallows Part 2 or Battle of the Five Armies where it's just this 5 hours of nonstop battling and it just gets old and boring?
I can't see that happening. I was so worried when I first went into this movie that they were going to mess things up, but they didn't. So they clearly seem to have a plan in mind, and I like how, like, almost like a chessboard, they set up all the pieces. I do like in the position that they're left off in. My only concern, we can get into the finer details of the movie itself, but I do kind of wish they didn't go so gung ho with everything about the movie, because you look at the Spider-Man original trilogy, the Tobey Maguire ones, they didn't get that insane from one movie to the next. It was just a gradual progression, for better or for worse. The first movie felt somewhat grounded. There were some elements with the multiverse and whatnot, but it almost feels like it's just immediately jumping to the last step almost, which is okay if they just leave it as a trilogy. That would be sweet, and just don't touch it too much. But if they were going for something like a cinematic universe, it kind of is it is kind of a big jump, I feel.
Yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from, but the first movie by itself had a lot of multiverse elements. I mean, the entire movie was about the multiverse. You had different versions of Spider-Man and different versions of the villains and stuff like that.
They did, but it was literally like, here we go again, and then they just did a 15-second review of their world and then how they ended up there. That was it.
Yeah. So I guess I can kind of see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I really appreciate the way that they describe the multiverse in this. I just saw The Flash Thursday, and the way they describe their multiverse, like the DC's multiverse, it works, but it's still like confusing. Same thing for Doctor Strange or when Spider-Man No Way Home came out, or Ant-Man and the Wasp or Loki. The way that everybody is doing their multiverse is wonky. It doesn't feel fully fleshed out or thought out. It just feels like, hey, there's a bunch of different characters and timelines and stuff like that. It's not like in this movie where it just felt like they explained it so
It's so
simple when
simple. The
Miguel's
problem is simple.
it's simple.
And the
It's
yeah.
super simple. And I like that because in all the other movies, they blow it up to such a huge, huge problem that our mind can't comprehend it. So I like in this movie that it's condensed. It's like Miguel's like, hey, in every universe, there's these things called canon events. If that canon event doesn't happen, that universe will inevitably implode,
Yeah, and they
basically.
just he's just trying to keep things to the status quo even if it means bad things happen. And
Yeah, and
that's it.
it's just taken super simple. It's not like the whole world will end and every universe will die. It's like it doesn't make your head spin, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no, they don't play into it. A lot of the Spider-Men in the background were just kind of there, either as nods to
Mhm.
whatever or just kind of references or just normal Spider-Man. They didn't go into more detail than they kind of had to in that regard, and I'm glad because the movie was long enough as it was.
Yeah, 2.5 hours. This is the longest American made cartoon. I could not believe that.
It did not feel it, especially at least on the first viewing. I thought, like I said, I literally thought there was still an hour left of the movie when I went to go to the bathroom, and it was like 10 minutes left. It did a
Mhm.
great job pacing.
Yeah.
There was always something happening.
Yeah, I guess I'll get into my problems right now with the movie, and these aren't breaking problems. The movie is still a 9 out of 10 for me, and there are elements that I liked better than the first movie. I think the first there's two problems that stem. One when you watch it the first time, and two when you watch it the second time. The first time I watched it, especially with the beginning with Gwen when she's banging on the drums, they're throwing so much at you, it's overwhelming. And what I mean by that is not information, but their art styles. I like that they went a step beyond, like with the punk spider, the spider punk. I like that like there's every single different art style you can think of. The problem is when an action scene was happening or when Gwen was banging on her drums, every single frame was a different color, a different art style, a different wallpaper almost. And it just was overwhelming to me. That was my problem the first time watching it. The second time, that's not a problem. But the second time watching it, I was ready for it to ramp up. The movie ramps up when you come to the Indian spider scene. That's when the movie jumps and it starts taking off in speed. The problem when you're watching it the second time is I'm waiting for that to happen more. I loved it the first time when it took its time with the characters. Second time watching it, I was just not necessarily bored, but I was just waiting for it to jump. You know what I mean?
I kind of get it. I could see the initial area with like Miles struggling to like get his life together basically. It could be a lull in the second time, but I still think all of it's necessary. And the initial scene with Gwen, some of my friends didn't like it either, but I kind of liked how cool the watercolors were, kind of representing emotion and whatnot. And the Galileo looking was it Green Goblin that came in? I thought he was kind of
This
cool
is a
too. Oh,
vulture.
as a vulture?
No, no. I totally agree that like everything was super well done. I'm just saying that that first time you're watching it, like with Gwen Stacy, sometimes it was just overwhelming. Like you have the parchment paper vulture, super super cool, but all of a sudden there's 50 different things happening and there's 50 different art styles that are clashing and it's just overwhelming at times. That it was just for me
I
personally though.
understand that.
It
I
felt like.
understand that. I feel like that beginning section's better than most people let on, and I'm kind of glad they started with Gwen Stacy. Yeah, Gwen Stacy, because I don't know, they actually made it interesting as to why she ended up with the spider people. Like that's actually compelling, and I'm just glad that they kind of expanded on it. At least her, she was probably the most interesting person besides maybe Miles and the other Spider-Man in the first movie. And just having that going on, that turmoil in the background, why she can't go back is kind of cool. And it had a nice resolution
Mhm.
later. So as far as the beginning of the movie, I will say I like that part. I did feel that the Miles scenes kind of were okayishly. Maybe they went on a bit long for me, but I understand why they did it.
No, I totally agree that I loved the beginning with Gwen Stacy. I loved that it took its time with that. Like the opening, like it's what, like 30 minutes or 20 minutes the first
I'll
scene,
tell you what, I
and
have
then
no
that's
sense of
when
time watching that movie. I have no idea.
it was weird. It felt like the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes was dedicated to Gwen Stacy. The entire movie is in the beginning, it's dedicated to Gwen Stacy, and then all of a sudden, right when she goes to uh, the portal with Miguel and Spider Woman, that's when it cuts to the across the Spider Verse, like Sony Pictures presents. That
Yeah, that took a
surprised me, like
minute to
how
get
long
there.
it
I
took.
thought they were just skipping it, and I wasn't even mad, but it works. It does work, but it is a fair
Yeah,
bit
it
in.
works. That it definitely surprised me. Um, but I agree with you. Like the Miguel scenes, or not the Miguel scenes, the Miles scenes. The second time dragged just a little bit. I was totally hooked the first time because the thing that I like about Miles that is very distinct from Peter Parker. Peter Parker is relatable to a lot of people because he has to deal with things that normal everyday people have to deal with: bills, girlfriend problems, and work. The problem with Peter Parker, though, also is that his parents died and his uncle died. So while that's relatable to some people, it's not. Like for me, I never lost my parents, so that's not super relatable there. Neither have you.
Right.
Miles is more relatable to people like us because he has problems with his parents. He clashes with them all the time, and it's not for stupid reasons. It's hey, you were late today to my party. You know what
Yeah,
I
no,
mean?
they were played for laughs sometimes, but I appreciate it. That is actually like there's very few Spider-Man comics where they have to deal with that aspect of it. He's never young enough to where that's an issue, or they're just not even there because they died or
Hmm.
something. So, and that's a is Tom Holland Spider-Man, is that kind of what they went for? Maybe with his classmates, but I don't know. Either way, they did this probably the
Well,
best out of any other Spider-Man on screen so far.
yeah, and I like that they did that because if I'm remembering the Miles comics in the beginning, the very first Miles Morales comics, they did Miles' story very differently from that of the movie. I want to say that the PS4 Spider-Man is a more accurate representation of what happened in the
Hmm.
comics. So his uncle is still alive. His dad does die in the comics. Uh, but Spider-Man dies before Miles ever gets bitten. It's not like in the movie where uh, Spider-Man is kind of like the Uncle Ben almost, or
Yeah, yeah.
in the beginning, and then once his uncle dies, that's what makes him want to be Spider-Man. It's not like that in the comics. It's his dad that is like the Uncle Ben, and uh, I want to say that Genki, his roommate friend, was a lot like Ned in Spider-Man: Homecoming and Spider-Man PS4.
Mhm. Okay. I like that they changed it though in that first movie with Peter Parker, like him actually being able to see and talk to him, and how that whole, for one, it lets this the second movie even take place in the first place, and two, I really did just I appreciated that they changed it so that he was able to see him fight and how he was, and what it kind of gives him something to live up to. That was I
Yeah.
just liked that
No,
point.
no, I appreciate the changes too. I'm just trying to remember like what's very specifically different from what the comics had. Because I remember when Miles came out when he was brand new, and I read the comics. Uh, the thing that I appreciate the most about these movies is his uncle character. His uncle in the comics was, like I said, I might be misremembering, but he wasn't that great of a person. He was the Prowler, but it was also where he kind of knew he was Spider-Man, and he always like played off that, where it was like, hey, I kind of know you have a secret, but I'm not going to tell you that I know. Like he would always like use that against Miles to a
And
certain
that is
degree.
a neat
And I
concept,
liked,
but yeah, this works better in this series.
yeah, but I like his uncle in the first movie a lot. He was one of the best characters in that first movie. And so when he came back in this movie, it's like, oh man, it's I was really excited.
Yeah, that's gonna I like that conflict within them for that right at the end there.
Hmm.
That's gonna be very interesting. just the whole ending. But to kind of bring it back to like the movie itself, the best part about this movie was the action and how well it was animated. And like you said, it all started with the kind of the one that takes place in India. That first scene is so fun. I love the design for that Spider-Man. Like he just looks so fun, and I like the way he just it's kind of like foreshadowing where he's like, "I'm Spider-Man and I have absolutely zero problems." You know, it's like I have, and he's just going on about how great his life is, but then you kind of know it's coming to where it just hasn't happened yet. And then just the whole place. Once they got there, I knew it was going to be a really sweet scene, and it did not
Hmm.
disappoint. And then from there, the movie just never stopped being cool.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too because I love Bollywood movies so much,
Hmm.
and so like you watched a few with me, so I bet like you appreciated that scene a lot more because of that.
Yeah.
Um, but that I absolutely loved, especially when he's talking like, "Oh, here's the traffic, here's the traffic, here's the traffic, and here's where the British stole our stuff."
Yeah, he was super fun.
Yeah, and also I think there was two scenes that made me laugh out the most. We'll get to the second scene later, but the first scene is when he's talking about like, oh, and there's this girl named I couldn't pronounce it or remember it, but and then all of a sudden he's like, ah, Inspector Sir, here is your daughter who I do not know, and they're like slowly drifting apart.
Hmm.
That part made me laugh so hard.
Yeah, it is just so fun. And the conflict itself, the main conflict with them being the canon events, and that's what he has to protect against. That whole thing is kind of a joke, right? It's like, the joke is it's like Spider-Man writers trying not to make Spider-Man absolutely miserable, impossible
Oh
challenge.
yeah,
It's
with
like
his new comic series, yeah.
it's all of them. Like every single one, he loses everyone he loves. It's just horrific. But they made that joke almost just that trend into the literal compelling plot point, and it works. It actually works. It's like these
Yeah.
are canon story events. Every Spider-Man has to lose like at least somebody, and if you mess it up, it messes with everything.
Yeah, I liked it too where it's like kind of joking with the audience where it's you know how like people like when we're discussing Marvel Cinematic Universe or Spider-Man, it's like, oh, this is canon to this universe, this is canon to that universe, or this is non-canon. This is my own thoughts of what they
Yeah.
should do. I like that.
No, I agree. I agree. And I liked that whole I know after the India scene, they went to whatever Fortress of Solitude for the Spider-Man, whatever it was in that one universe. And I liked that, and we can get into that, but what comes after that? I don't remember.
What do you mean?
So they go, he after that he meets Miguel, and they kind of describe like what's going on, why he was in the wrong, and they meet all the Spider-Men. What
Oh,
happens
that's when like
afterwards?
well, that's when he explains like the canon events or whatever, and uh he's like showing him around, and that's when he finds out his dad's gonna die or something like that, or the spot
Oh, that's right. And we haven't
is
even gotten into the
getting more
spot.
power. Oh my gosh, the spot's getting more powerful at the same time, and
That's
then
right.
everybody turns on Peter or not Peter, Miles, and it goes from there.
And that's man, this movie went fast. Um,
I know it's very well paced for 2 hours and 30 minutes.
I swear there's more stuff in there, like with Spider Punk and whatnot. I know he was there, but I swear there was more. Just they were doing something else, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think he just like is in there in the Indian scene, like he helps in they're in India and he blasts through the door, and that's when he helps Miles to learn like the sucking of the electricity power more fully.
Oh, right, they trap him and whatnot.
Um, and he like jumps out of the portal when everybody's after him. He doesn't agree with that.
Right, right. But yeah, we can go back to that scene though. So right after that, they're trying to Gwen's trying not to get him to join that organization. Saying it's super
Mm.
exclusive and whatnot. And he gets there, and it's literally every Spider-Man ever. But it was fun
Yeah,
meeting
even Lego Spider-Man.
Lego Spider-Man was awesome. Truly awesome. That
Uh-huh.
was such a fun nod.
He's like, "You're one of our best, Peter. Thank you, Peter."
Yeah, yeah. And as far as the exposition dump, right, with Miguel telling him how this all works and what his backstory is, I like it was okay. As about as good as you can expect from what is in all likelihood just an exposition dump. It just is a way for them to tell us what's happening. It made sense at the time, and they half poked fun at it because of how serious he was, Miguel being, and I don't know. I do like that it both sets up his backstory as well as explaining what's going on, basically, and also showing the conflict in the future. That being, how his one of his parents are gonna die. I think his dad in the future, and yeah, that moment at least really set up the conflict for the rest of the movie and potentially this next movie.
Yeah, I like that it puts it into your mind that Miles was not meant to be
Oh,
Spider-Man
that's right.
in his universe. I liked that a lot because it comes up at the end and I didn't see the ending coming from a long shot. The minute they bring it up, you're like, "What?" And then all of a sudden your mind flashes back to these scenes when they're explaining that his Spider-Man was or his spider was sucked out of a universe and transported to his universe. So he wasn't meant to be the Spider-Man in his universe. Rather, another Miles was supposed to be the Spider-Man in
And
that
that's how the
universe.
spot came into existence because you
Bagel.
I love that that is so funny. He was so funny in the first movie, and who would have thought that that guy that got smacked by the bagel ended up being the main villain of the second movie, or at least kind of.
Hmm.
I really wish they didn't sideline him so much, but he was fun regardless whenever he was on screen.
Oh, the Spot was awesome because the Spot is kind of like a joke character almost in Spider-Man comics.
Hmm.
I don't know about recently, but I know like in the cartoon, like the one that's playing behind me, the animated series, he was kind of like a joke character. And that's what I liked about the beginning. Like they're having fun with it. Oh, he can't control his spots and he's flashing into this scene. And then in the next one, like an ATM's popping out of the ground. Or I like that they had a lot of fun with it. They didn't make him too serious. And then once uh, he starts to become more powerful, that's when he got more serious.
And that was just yeah, no, and then he's a fun villain. I thought he was neat to fight. I liked how Miles just ignored him in the first part, just completely was disinterested and just was busy texting someone half the fight. And then he just slowly gets more and more insane. That's just so funny to me.
Yeah, I like that they have fun with the villains in this version of Spider-Man. Like Kingpin in the first movie.
He was fun. I liked him.
That was the funniest iteration of Kingpin because of how big
He
he
was just
was.
so
Dude was
goofy looking.
he was a unit. Like anytime they showed a picture of him with his wife and kid, he's like 9 times the size of both of them. So I like that they made fun of like that aspect of the character because every time you see Kingpin, he's always big and he's like, "Oh, let's make the biggest iteration there ever was a Kingpin." Same thing with the Spot. I like that they had fun with him, like how joking of a character he was. uh, it's a guy that throws spots. Like,
Yeah, no, it's so silly, but at the same time, it works. And I do like the subversion of that being Miguel literally being Spider-Man, fast talking, quip slinging, but he's like the most serious person ever, even though he's Spider-Man. It just kind of goes to show
mhm.
how deeply he cares about what he's doing and how much what he did in the past affected him. So he is going to be a pretty compelling villain in the next movie.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't remember a whole lot of 2099 Spider-Man. Um, as in terms of his characterization being off in this movie or anything, whether it was accurate to the comics or not. Um, the only thing that I knew that they did accurately was his costume. First of all, was pretty accurate, and anytime he had like those big fins on his arm
Yeah,
that would he would use to like stop himself, that was in the comics. Same thing goes for his talons. He had like talon hands in the comic books too, so that was pretty accurate.
cuz he's half spider, right?
I'm not quite sure. I
I
don't
think
really
he
remember.
didn't get bitten by one. I think he like was genetically spliced together. He's like a lab baby, and they was like
Hmm.
literally like that's why he has the fangs and stuff, and he has to like inject himself to kind of keep it down because like he's literally
Mm.
half spider, half man. So
Yeah, I don't remember. The red webs that he does, those are accurate. Those are
I
accurate
don't
as
even think
well.
those are real webs, but they are cool regardless.
Well, like yeah, like I couldn't remember a whole lot. I just remember like certain things like of the character were very accurate and I couldn't tell you anything more than like those few details.
But yeah, both
It's
of the
been a
villains,
long time since I
both
read
of the
those.
villains are just kind of cool in this movie, and I really liked
Mhm.
when they're all chasing him, chasing Miles up that train. That was such a fun fight that they had, and that was probably the other
4
highlight.
years. Took 4 years to animate that entire sequence.
I believe it. There was so much going on; it wasn't even funny.
Mhm.
Eh,
I like that they also didn't do uh the thing that a lot of multiverse movies fail on. Like I think Doctor Strange really failed on the multiverse. Like how many different versions are of Doctor Strange? Because in it it's like, "Oh, in this one Doctor Strange has a beard. This one Doctor Strange has a different eyeball." It's like,
no, they have
"Okay."
diversity. It's
And
kind of neat.
that's what I like about this movie is that you have a car Spider-Man, you have a cat Spider-Man, you have Spider Ham, you have a T-Rex that was Spider-Man, you have the cowboy version of Spider-Man, and all the different iterations. Like they even have like video games. I
Yeah, it
saw
was
like
him.
from the Atari, from the NES. Same thing for Insomniac Spider-Man. He shows up for like two
Hmm.
seconds.
No, I agree, and it's just so that I just love these movies. I feel like both of them so far have taken everything, every reason why a movie should be animated and proved it. Just proved it to everyone because of
Hmm.
what they've done. Like they took advantage of every conceivable pro of making it an animated movie and just ran with it. Made it the best it could be.
No, I definitely agree. There's like a reason that Mario was an animated movie. You just can't do certain things in live
Well, never
action.
say
Or
never, but
I'm just saying, like, there's things that you can do and can't do in a live action environment. And Spider Verse, it's definitely one of those.
it is. And
Um, while you can show Spider Man swinging in live action, you can't do it the same way they do it in an animated version. Like in the comic books, anytime it would show a panel of Spider-Man, for instance, and he'd be like thwipping his web, the web would have a lot of detail where it would be, he would be doing these acrobatic moves, but at the same time, his web would be like spiraling around him like a whip or doing some weird move that you just couldn't do in a live action thing that would look real. You know what I
no,
mean?
yeah.
So in an animated
And
movie like this, you can do those crazy moves and crazy over the top like panel flips and stuff like that. I like that a lot.
yeah, it is. Yeah, overall, besides the ending, because after that scene, it literally starts wrapping up. There's some pretty cool plot twists at the end. But I do think that's the
Hmm.
one thing keeping it from being just that much better is because like something like an Infinity War, great movie, but the ending, I still remember that ending, seeing it in theaters, and it still holds up even without Endgame. This this does not have that. This quite literally shows Miles, shows Gwen and her group, shows the Spot, shows Miguel, and it ramps up, ramps up, ramps up, and end credits, and that's it.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't have an ending. It's literally like the next scene happens and it's building up, like you said. And it just cuts to black immediately. Like they jump to the screen and
Yeah, thanks
done.
for watching.
So I do agree where it's not like Infinity War where you can watch Infinity War just by itself. This movie has the part 1 part 2 syndrome where it ramps up ramps up ramps up at the end and you have to watch part 3 to have that release of dopamine almost.
I do wonder if they could have done it differently. Because if I were to change it a little bit, I would have implemented Gwen kind of breaking off from them, kept that at the end still. The Spot was. It's hard to wrap up the Spot, and it's hard to wrap up everything else. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't. Never mind, it wouldn't work. And you know what? Now that I think
Yeah,
about it, it's exactly what they did. So I'm just dumb.
yeah, I don't know if you could do this differently, like have it be where this movie can stand on its own. Like I this movie is the Empire Strikes Back almost, where Empire Strikes Back has an ending, but at the same time it doesn't, where, Han Solo is basically dead. He's whisked away by Boba Fett. Your characters are at their lowest point. Luke Skywalker had his hand chopped off and now he's got a robot hand. This movie feels a lot of the same, but like I said, it won't be that big of a deal if they stick the landing in the third movie. If they stick the landing, I'll be able to say this movie is a 10 out of 10 because where they went with the story.
Right.
But if they don't stick the landing, then uh, you know we'll just have to
Chances
see.
are, though,
But
they have given me confidence that they know what they're doing. If this movie was just okay or something, I would not be saying that. But despite its ending, it being as good as it was and improving on basically everything the first movie did, which was already amazing, I do feel like they're going to wrap it up nicely. Obviously, time will tell, but I'm a lot more confident about that movie than pretty much anything else coming out soon. So,
I have to see. It sounds like it's going to get delayed first of
hmm.
all. Haley Steinfeld said she hasn't recorded a single line for the third movie, and it's coming out next year. There's no way that's
Yeah, that's tough.
probably going to happen. But we'll see. Like I said, there's been way too many part one and part twos of movies, and the problem that they all have is you wait a year, let's say,
Yeah.
and part two comes out. Part two is usually this big fight they wanted to do in the last movie of part one, but they couldn't because it was way too long. So you're stuck with this movie that's basically 2 hours of just nonstop fighting with little characters interactions in there.
I totally agree. This one, we'll see if it falls into it, but like look at I know it's not a direct sequel or anything, but look at No Way Home was the final one. That movie is quite literally built upon two things. One, getting all the Spider-Mans, and two, having them all fight. Besides that, like that movie was made for that fight. And there wasn't
It was and it wasn't. You had to still watch, I think, the other Spider-Man movies to appreciate because you wouldn't understand a lot of things if all of a sudden uh the Amazing Spider-Man version grabs Mary Jane and he starts crying. Like
Okay, no, sorry,
you're
that's
not
a
going to
poor
understand
example.
this.
Endgame. I know you like it more, but but the first half of the movie is not nearly as interesting as the second half, and it's not even close.
But I wouldn't even say like Endgame was a part 2 necessarily.
It definitely was, and that's why they spent the first half putting around time travel.
But it was and it wasn't where Infinity War was a definitive you could watch this by itself. It had a definitive ending. It wasn't like this movie where it starts to ramp up and then all of a sudden it
I can't. No, I
it
can't
ends.
defend that. I'm.
And
But we're talking about
but
the second
Infinity
movie.
War No, 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 no. I understand that. But Endgame had that privilege of Infinity War being its own movie. So then Endgame could have, like character motivations in the beginning. Like the first hour and a half of Endgame is just character stuff. There's no action. There's like a little bit in there, but it's all character interactions and setting up the characters. Uh, so, like I
Right, but
said,
that's boring. Quite truly, it was fun because I saw it in theaters. But this movie will have the pro of just literally continuing. It will be in the middle of the action, right at the start of the movie, and it.
no, that's the thing I'm saying that will make it bad.
What?
If just listen, a lot of part twos, I'm trying to say to you, is part twos get bogged down by that. They start up right on the action scene, or they start off uh, just swinging, and it doesn't work. And that can be just for me personally. But out of all the part twos that I've seen, they start with action, or they start where the last movie left off immediately. And that's just not how to do a movie properly. You want to have it where the movie starts slow and builds up slowly. Because if all of a sudden your movie starts off like a roller coaster where you're going down the hill instead of building up like on an incline, that's where your movies go wrong. The minute you start a movie where it's a roller coaster where it goes down first and then up and down after that, it's wrong. In my opinion, a movie should be like the roller coaster at the beginning where you're anticipating it. Slowly, you're going up the hill, and then you go down and up and down and up and down.
I disagree. I
Part
think that
twos
this
have that problem, in my
this
opinion.
movie, the second one, will be good because I'm not saying it's all action, but there's enough action going on in the meantime. But there's also stuff that has to set up, like Gwen Stacy's like Spider Crew. They barely got together in the beginning. That has to be set up. Miles' interaction with himself in the other universe, that has to be set up. How's he going home? And then what are the Spider-Man and Spot going to do about it? That still needs to be set up in the beginning. But if that was all closed off and then they had to start literally from just they had to like the small talk again, just kind of putt around, get everything all together. This is already like halfway built up. They just have to finish it, and then once they get to that, the action can commence, and then it'll be a great two movie set to watch together, basically.
No, and I understand that. It's just like sometimes those part twos can be a slog because it's just nonstop fighting. So the way I'm saying that they're going to land part three, if they do it correctly, they need to build it up. It cannot start with this massive action scene that goes on for an hour
It won't. I
and
promise it
then
won't.
you get
There's no shot.
I don't know, I've seen way too many part twos and that's how they all start, it seems like.
Name one.
Or the desolate not the desolation of small. The Battle of Five Armies, it's just nonstop action for 2.5 hours and it's a slog. Deadly Hollows Part 2. Nonstop action, it's a slog. Uh no, I haven't watched part two of Mockingjay, but I'm guarantee you it's the same thing where it's just part 2 hours of nonstop action. That's how all of those part twos are, where it's just there's no build up. It just happens. And I guess that's fine if like you watch the movie before you go to the theater, but at the same time, I don't want to watch 3 hours or 2.5 hours of just nonstop fighting because that gets boring real fast. You want, like I said, that slow roller coaster where there's a slow build up to it, and then you have the big action scene, or you have a little bit of build up after that. Like I said, if the next movie where the first thing is this giant action scene between his Miles' uncle and his alternate self, and then the spider people come in, and it's just this big battle between them and Scarlet
But that's
Spider
not
and
going to
Spider
happen. That'd be a
Woman.
skirmish in the grand scheme of things. Just like how what you're literally describing is this movie to Spider Verse, into the
No,
Spider Verse, and this
no,
one. This one had a big action
but there's
scene in
still
India in this one, and it was awesome right in the beginning, kind of.
but there's still plenty of build up to it.
Yes,
You have to catch up with Miles. You have to catch up with Gwen. You have to catch up with who Indian Spider-Man is. So, like I said, it will be fine if there's build up to it, like Avengers Endgame. I will be 100% happy of it.
right.
But if it's just 2 hours, or let's say that they come out with 3 hours, let's just say, if it's 3 hours of nonstop fighting, I will be severely disappointed, and I will even have to probably take away points from this movie.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't think it's gonna be 3 hours.
But
And even if it
you
is, it
have to
sounds like
look.
kind of cool. Anyways,
You have to. It's a part one, part two, basically. I know it's marketed as a totally two different titles, but it's part one, part two. So you have to look at it as one complete movie in the end.
And I think it will be an amazing movie because it literally stops in the middle. That's why they did it. It literally
I
stops
don't know,
in the middle.
and that's the problem I
Yeah, that's the
have.
problem I have with this movie. But when you put them together, they're gonna be just fine.
But that's the problem I'm saying. That's how a lot of those part one, part two movies are, where they stop in the middle of this grand 4 hour story or 5 hour story, and then the last 2.5 hours is just nonstop fighting with little
I
characters,
can see
little
that.
character
I can
stuff.
see that happening.
And I just don't want that. I honestly don't. If it happens, then I will be very disappointed.
Thankfully, this movie still has stuff like him meeting his alternate self, who's the Prowler, and getting to see his Uncle Aaron again. That's actually like compelling story. There's stuff to be looked at there that's not just surface level. That still has to be discussed. Um,
It does, and like I said, like, it'll be fine. Part 3 will be fine if maybe the beginning is him talking to the other alternate Miles and his uncle, and maybe he convinces him to join his side, and there's, like, some build up to it. But if it's immediately the first frame is he electrocutes him and there's this big action scene between him and his alternate self, the Prowler, it's just gonna be a slog, I think. I honestly think.
I don't think so. And there's so much. I'm just saying, with them writing it, the people that made these two movies, I have no doubt. They still haven't gone super in depth into Miguel's backstory. I'd love to see that fully animated. Just what happened exactly in kind of like a flashback. That would be cool. That would be just to really drive home why he's doing what he's doing, even if it appears wrong, and why he's having such a hard time following along with Miles. But also, you understand why Miles isn't exactly on board either.
Yeah.
There's so much set up but they still have to be put into the proper places to get everything lined up. So there is story to be told.
Yeah, and like I said, I will enjoy it if there is like in the beginning it's a setup. But like I said, if it's all of a sudden you're at the top of the roller coaster at the beginning of the movie, I just don't think it will be good. I honestly just think it will be a slog and a half. But if there's like an Avengers Endgame level to it where it's built up, there's like an hour of character stuff or even 30 minutes of character stuff before the giant action scene that happens. I think it will be fine. I just don't want it to be like all the other part 2s that we've gotten over the last 10 years.
I agree. I do not want it to be an Avengers Endgame, and it very well might be.
But that's the thing, I want it to be an
That
Avengers
is the
Endgame.
last thing I want. That is so the last thing I want.
But there's a distinct difference between part 2s and Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame is yes, technically it's the part 2 to Infinity
That's
War,
all it ever
but
is.
it's
That's how I think of it.
but have to consider it's also like Infinity War was like Empire Strikes Back and Endgame was Return of the Jedi, where Return of the Jedi I think is one of the greatest endings you can have to a trilogy.
Right.
There's plenty of buildup in the beginning of Return of the Jedi. There's buildup to that excitement. So when all of a sudden Luke Skywalker is at the edge of that cliff and he's about to jump into the Sarlacc mouth, and all of a sudden R2D2 shoots his lightsaber out, there's been some buildup to it, like 20 minutes of buildup to that big action scene.
Right.
So I don't want the beginning of this new movie, the third movie, to all of a sudden just be action scene, action scene, action scene, action scene,
I agree.
because that's how part 2s and part 1s always happen. If it's like Endgame and Return of the Jedi, where there's a you can kind of consider them two different movies, I'll be fine with it. But if it's like a part 2 to a part 1 where, all right, Across the Spider-Verse was all of our character development. Part 2 of Beyond the Spider-Verse is going to be the big action scene we couldn't fit into this movie.
I agree with
That
that.
will be
That we can
severely
both agree.
that but that's what I've been yeah, that's what I've been trying to
Okay.
explain. Like
That makes sense.
if it's that, because that's how every single part 2 movie has been. Now, like I said, if it's like Return of the Jedi or Avengers Endgame, it'll be great. Where there's plenty of buildup, you can kind of consider it its own story. I just don't know with this ending, as well as the track record of a lot of part 2s.
Hmm.
Because originally, remember, this was called part 2. Now it's not.
Yes, it is. It was the first one was called Part One. That was in the trailer.
No, 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 no. It got changed last year.
This one is
I
current.
yeah, I looked it up because I was really confused because I forgot it was a part 1. And so when I looked it up, it was originally marketed as Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. But now this one is called Across the Spider-Verse
Hmm.
period. And the second movie that's coming after this is called Beyond the Spider-Verse.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
The movie ends with that.
But yeah, cool. I still think this is an amazing movie. We'll see how the third, well, I guess the third one turns out. But I really did like it. I think I've pretty much said most of what I want to say about it. Any other things that you thought were of note? I'm sorry we couldn't get it all, but it was kind of a crazy episode. I'm so glad it lived up to our expectations.
No, I mean, like, I really think this is a good movie. will probably be in my top 10 for the rest of the year, and I'm just cautious about the next movie. I'm very, very cautious. I'm not even optimistic about it. I'm just being very, very
I'm gung
cautious.
ho. I think they proved themselves that they can write a half decent story, so I'll be there for it. Of course, we both will, but I think I'm pretty excited. So we'll see when that comes out.